Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking MicroFreak version 5.0, its place in 2023, should you get one if you don't already have one, and my overall thoughts of owning it for basically 4 years now. 3.5 really. I got it towards the end of 2019, and I believe this came out mid-2019. It's been some time, and it's had a lot of updates. I mean, every year has basically had some updates, with the exception of last year. I think the last update was 2021. I believe there was about a year and a half space between version 4 and version 5. And also they expanded the presets even further. There was a previous update that bumped the presets, and then this last update bumped it even further, so even more space for presets, plus sampling time or sample space holder type of stuff, so pretty awesome. So if you're unaware, version 5 brought in granular processing and also sample playback. It's not a sampler, so if you're thinking that you're going to be able to like take the MicroFreak and sample stuff, that's not how it's set up. You still have to have a computer, and the computer has to be used to be able to transfer samples into your MicroFreak. So there's a little friction in terms of being able to get stuff into the MicroFreak. But once it's in there, it sounds awesome. This is one of the presets, Revert to Iron, that came with the new 60, or no, I think it was 50 something presets that they dropped with version 5. It's a really fun synth. So the way I have this set up right now is I have the MicroFreak going into a Electron analog heat plus effects, but it is muted right now, or there's no effects actually on, so it's just bypassing it. The reason I set this up is because there is no effects in the MicroFreak. It's one of these things where it's a great synth, but it does not have reverb, doesn't have delay, doesn't have chorus, doesn't have distortion or anything like that. It's a pretty basic synth when you look at its raw components. The algorithmic side of the synthesizer is very interesting and relatively complex, but outside of that, it's a pretty traditional synthesizer that's like paraphonic, meaning that the filter, the envelope, LFO, cycling envelope, all that are all shared with the 4 voices that you can get out of the digital oscillator. So you could stack all 4 voices into one unison type of thing, or you can play a chord. Or let me go back to Revert to Iron. So that sound is all sharing the same filter and envelopes and LFO and all that, as you can hear. So relatively simple synth with a lot of unique character type of things going on. And the main generator of that character is these digital oscillators, this algorithmic oscillator type of stuff. And it has its roots in modular, because plates, or plats, or whatever you want to call it, for mutable instruments is kind of like, I believe the beginning source code for that stuff, and then they built on top of that, they made their own modules in the oscillators, and then with each update they've added more and more stuff. And this last update added granular, which is so cool, and the sample playback. So obviously this depends on if you're a fan of granular synthesis. I personally am. I really like the possibilities with granular, because you can load up a regular acoustic instrument and then start treating it like a synthesizer, and I think that's really cool. So I just changed this to the cloud. I can scan through the start, the density, chaos for variation. And obviously it's all modulatable with the matrix, so really cool. Also forgot to mention, this is currently USB powered, and I have it hooked up to an MPC 1 Plus off to my side. But that's the only thing that the MPC 1 Plus is doing. It's just giving it power, because I actually don't know where my power supply is for my MicroFreak. So I've pretty much just been relying on the USB power for the past couple of years. So the Analog Heat Plus Effects is a new device as of about a month ago, and I am going to be doing a full review on this, or full thoughts, so if you're curious about that, make sure to subscribe to the channel. But I actually think this is a pretty solid box to pair with the MicroFreak to give this example, because the MicroFreak is something that you need to pair with. Like whether it's going to be a DAW or another sampler or something, it needs to go with something, because its core sound is going to be raw, you know, like there's no effects. So this is cool sounding. As soon as you start adding effects to it, it really opens up. I'm going to take off the analog heat for now. I'm going to go to a patch that I made out of Meems Voice, my wife. So we have this sample pack called Ambient Cinematic Vocals, and it's for a bunch of platforms. You can use it on the Waldorf Iridium for the granular mode on there. So naturally, I wanted to load a couple samples into here to see how it feels. So this is one of those samples. So let's add some effects here. I'm actually going to reset this preset on the analog heat FX so I can kind of build it up from scratch. I guess we'll stick with saturation here. I'm going to reset these levels, and I'm going to give it a little bit of EQ as well. So this should only be the saturation and the compressor. In fact, we could probably get rid of the compressor as well. So we're just going to have the heat effects initially. Turn it down a little bit. So just dirtied it up a bit, which I definitely like. Now we're going to start putting on some effects. Let's do the traditional stuff first. Let's go chorus. Let's max out the width. Okay. Now let's go delay. Now I'm going to go to the reverb. So without, interesting raw sound, but as soon as you start adding effects with anything, whether it's going to be the DAW or an MPC or the analog heat, like, you can see how the sound character really opens up in the MicroFreak and why it's such a unique and interesting synthesizer. Because as soon as you start pairing it with other things, it just opens up. So that obviously might be a bit out there, and intentionally so, because the sample has a lot of harmonic content in it. But if you switch the type of the oscillator, because if you're new to the MicroFreak and you start exploring some of these other oscillators, we can just go back to a basic wave. Now again, I'll take off the heat. So this is just a basic wave. Let's take off the chorus, just for now. Now you notice I flubbed a note right there. The MicroFreak isn't perfect, and I do think that the keyboard, while it's interesting, it's not my favorite. It does have this touch thing where if you lay down your finger, it starts, it provides some modulation with the press. It's interesting from a performance perspective and those things, but if you're used to a keyboard, I personally prefer a regular keyboard. Which you then might be thinking, well, how about the MiniFreak? And in my opinion, I think the MiniFreak is a better choice for starting out or getting a synthesizer that's going to have a lot of capabilities that you could learn on and also still play as a regular keyboard. I'll save that for the end, actually. We'll come back to that. So let's turn the effects back on. Next is Superwave. No effects. Next, wavetable. Go through the position. Add some chorus to it. Oh yeah, some of the algorithms do have actual effects inside of the oscillator. It's just you're not going to be able to apply effects post all of the VCA, envelope, filter type of stuff. It's always going to start in the oscillator, and then you'll have to apply effects afterwards once you record it, or put into a sampler or something. For me, this has been a really great texture synthesizer. It does a really good job at that, so long as you add some effects afterwards, obviously. Moving on, harmonic. And by the way, I'm just going through the oscillators here. I'm not changing presets, just changing the oscillator. Take off the effects. Now let's put the effects on. Let's use the filter on the analog heat. So cool. All right, let's take that off. Moving on, we got a string modeler. Effects. Obviously there's a bunch of stuff here, you know, virtual analog, so you can add some additional like detuning to the oscillators naturally, wave shaper, FM, just so cool. Also chords. I usually don't use the chord module too often. Got speech, modal, just tons of texture. Love it. On the sample playback. So that's one of the ambient vocal samples that we have in our pack. I just loaded it directly from the user interface in the computer. So with the version 5, you got the sample playback, you got scan grains, cloud grains, and hit grains. So obviously, when you have it all loaded up and you're playing with it like this, it's fun, right? The actual interface to load things up, at least on a Mac computer, was buggy. It seemed like it hung upon communication for a good solid couple minutes, and then it would be like, okay, I'm ready to talk. And then loading the samples takes a while, like a couple minutes or so for just like a basic sample. So it's not exactly like fast and convenient to load up these samples with it. This is an update 4 years later after the box was released, so I'm not complaining. I just want to get that front and center. This is not a complaint specifically, it's just a real world use. If you're thinking, oh man, this is my new sampler, it's not. It's a sample playback system, and it has really cool granular features, but getting those samples into the box is not going to be like this. Oh, I have this idea real quick, I want to jump and, put it in here. You're gonna have to stop and spend like 10 minutes hooking it up, making sure the software is working, and then loading up a sample, unless you have it permanently hooked up to your computer. But even then, every time I opened it up, it was like be slow and hung or something like that. So, word to the wise, it might be a little strange to get stuff loaded on there, but once you do have it loaded on, it's obviously really cool. It's a really fun box to work with. Real quick, if you're enjoying this content and want to support the channel beyond a like and subscribe, consider using our affiliate links. Our affiliate of choice is Zounds. We've been using them for years. If you're going to pick up a MicroFreak, consider using our affiliate links because it will help out the channel. So thank you very much. So I was going to mention MiniFreak versus MicroFreak. There's like a $200-300 discrepancy between the two. So you might be thinking like, which one? Which should you go for? If you're new to both, and you don't have any kind of like perspective on it, my thought is if you want a synthesizer that is going to be a main synth for your studio, go with the MiniFreak. And the reason is it has effects and it has 6 voices, and each one of those voices do not share the same filter and envelope. They all have their own filter and envelope essentially, so it's a traditional polyphonic synthesizer, and it still has the really cool algorithmic digital oscillators. It does miss some of these oscillators, in fact quite a few at this point. Arturia could potentially update the MiniFreak in the future. In fact, I know there was talks about that for the wavetable type of stuff, so I'm sure the MiniFreak will at some point get some updates that are going to be really nice, because it's only been out for about 6 months at this point. But if you're looking for a new first-time hardware synthesizer, I don't think the MicroFreak is really the best choice specifically. And I know some of you might be like, whoa, what are you talking about stuff, blah, blah, blah. And the reason why I say that is the keyboard, I don't think is as user-friendly for initial first time starting out. I think it's a bit awkward actually. I think it's cool when you've been playing keys and you want a different perspective, then this keyboard is interesting. But as your main synth, like if I had this in a laptop, I'd eventually be like, oh, I should just buy a MIDI keyboard. Like while I do like what I'm getting out of the MicroFreak, the performance experience can be a little lackluster. The MiniFreak kind of solves that. It is more expensive and it's a bit bigger. It's about like this size, but it solves those problems for you. The other thing is you definitely need effects with this. So anytime you're going to use the MicroFreak, you're pretty much always going to want to have this paired with something else, whether it's like a SP404 or an MPC Live or MPC1 or something, or like I have the Analog Heat FX hooked up here. So you are always going to want to hook it up to something else to get the full experience out of the MicroFreak, which is also another reason why I don't think it's a good first choice for a synth. If you have a studio full of gear, or if you have several pieces and you're looking for an interesting palette of sound to open up creative potential and also a different way to interface with the keyboard, MicroFreak's perfect. You should definitely pick it up because it's unique, it's interesting, it's fun. Also, I think it complements the MiniFreak at this point as well, because it is definitely different. Yeah, I just wanted to share some thoughts on the MicroFreak after owning it for almost 4 years at this point. It's been one of these devices that I've always had near me at any point, and sometimes I don't use it for months, and then the new update will hit, and I'll be like, oh man, and then I'll use it for like 6 months, I'll make a bunch of beats with it, then I'll shelve it for a few months, and then bring it back out afterwards, and I don't know, it's just one of these things that has this chameleon-like nature to it that has been really cool. I like it, I definitely recommend it, considering those situations though. If it's your first hardware synth, you could be disappointed because of the lack of effects and the keyboard. But if you already have a studio full of stuff, or you have a full DAW setup, with like a really nice MIDI keyboard that you can already use, then hooking this up directly into your DAW and then applying effects in it in Ableton or something like that would actually be a really fun process, because tweaking the knobs and recording stuff directly in, capturing that audio, and then manipulating it further, that's always a fun experience. If you like and subscribe, thank you. And if you want to see a review on the Analog Heat FX, that's coming soon, so stay subscribed. Thank you so much, I appreciate you watching. If you do have thoughts on the MicroFreak, drop them below, would love to read them. I'll see you next time for another one. Peace.